Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
And hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. It is the screaming headline that no one wanted to hear, right? Especially if you're an investor. So Wall Street plummets again, this time 2,000 points, and it's being reported as the cause of a coronavirus that is continuing to spread and a price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia that crashed oil prices. So that's the headline. And look, yes, it's bad, but there's more to this story than oil and a spreading virus. In fact, you know, it would be irresponsible to make this story about only those two factors and leave out everything else, when in fact the economy was really already on shaky ground. Look, I need to say this, and you know why I need to say this? Because we here on the News with Rick Sanchez have been chasing this story. We've been asking questions. We've been telling you again and again and again that the description of our nation's economic vitality just was not making any sense. We've been saying this for months. We've had experts from Ron Paul to John Grace to some of our correspondents, economic analysts, pointing out that what we're being told just does not add up. How can we be experiencing the so-called greatest economy ever if we're lowering interest rates? That does not make sense. You lower interest rates to help a sick economy, to bring it up, not a vibrant one. Same as the repo operations that we've been telling you about. Why would our central bank be printing money and pouring billions and billions of dollars a day, by the way, into our banks if the banks were in such great shape? See, that's not something you do when banks are in great shape. That's something you do when banks can't pay their loans. Again, it doesn't make sense. But for the better part of a year now, while we here have been asking questions, these questions, on this newscast, night in, night out, reporters and politicians have been generally ignoring these issues. Well, today, guess what, folks? Guess what happened today? The chickens have come home to roost. Having used up all of its bullets trying to sustain the greatest economy of all time, our government and our central bank are now in a horrible predicament. After already pouring billions and billions into banks, what do you do now? Pour trillions? After lowering interest rates to almost nothing, what do you do now? Go into negative interest rates? And if it didn't save the market before, you know, they did this last week, remember? 50 basis points down. What did it do? Nothing. Market kept going further down. So, look, it's just, you don't have to be an economist to ask this question, right? If they just did it last week and it didn't do anything, what makes us think if they do it again, it's going to do anything? Here's what the forecast looks like right now. Travel, retail, oil, according to the experts, ain't going to be coming back anytime soon. Yes, and I said ain't on purpose. I know it's grammatically incorrect. A recession, according to most experts, is now almost unavoidable. And that means Donald Trump is likely going to have to go see Nancy Pelosi and ask Congress for some kind of bailout. Yes, they're talking about another stimulus package, another bailout. And what does that mean? These are all the really important questions that we need to be asking on this day, as this story started breaking early this morning. This is a historic day on Wall Street. You've seen the numbers? By the way, when I say historic, I mean historically bad. But is it all being caused by a virus and an oil war, as many reporters and politicians would have you believe? See, that's an important question that we're going to tackle right here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. Here is our list of the questions that we think you're going to be asking tomorrow after watching our newscast tonight. Just how many more bad days can the market stand, and what can be done to stop it? Why are Russia and Saudi Arabia involved in an oil production war. Will the president go to Congress to ask for yet another government bailout at some point? Okay, let's begin with what happened today. So the trigger that freaked out the market last week was the coronavirus, and it spread. Today it was something else. It's an oil production war between Saudi Arabia and Russia that has sent oil prices to historic, almost scary lows. Now, here's how Reuters is describing what happened today. I'm going to read to you from Reuters. Ready? Oil prices, they say, shot down almost 30% as Saudi Arabia started a price war with Russia by slashing its selling prices and pledging to unleash its pent-up supply onto the open market, which was already reeling from falling demand because of the coronavirus. That's the way Reuters is characterizing what happened today. Not us, Reuters, right? We have team coverage on this development with Boom Bust and market watcher Christy I breaking down the Saudi-Russian price war. But we're going to begin with Alex Mihailovich. He's our correspondent reporting tonight from Toronto.
It is the largest single-day drop in oil prices since the beginning of the Gulf War back in 1991. Saudi Arabia has introduced the deepest cut in oil prices in about 20 years, causing crude to tank.
The Saudis, are significantly increasing production and especially really going aggressively after pricing.
The price of international oil benchmark Brent fell approximately a third before recovering by about 10%. A beef between Saudi Arabia and Russia triggered the drop. Last week, OPEC, which includes Saudi Arabia, decided to cut production to keep oil prices up. Russia, which is not a member, did not agree with the plan. To put pressure on Russia, the Saudis flipped the script and announced that they would increase supply and offer discounts to buyers. Now, while Saudi Arabia may be trying to teach Russia a lesson, the plan could easily backfire. Russia has plenty of resources to support its economy during a time of oil market turmoil. As for Saudi Arabia, not so much. With a narrow safety margin in its budget system, the kingdom would have difficulties trying to endure low oil prices for a long period of time. As the battle between these giants continues, others may get hurt along the way.
So we've got a virtual trade war, oil war going on between Saudi Arabia and Russia, and at the end of the day, the loser could be us.
U.S. shale oil producers could get hit hard. Compared to traditional fossil fuel extraction methods, shale oil extraction is expensive. American companies in the business would have a hard time surviving if prices remain low for a long time. And Canada isn't immune to the situation either. Energy stocks have taken a hit, and the already suffering oil-rich province of Alberta is bracing for more job losses. While things seem dim, there are a couple of possible upsides to all of this. Cheaper oil may help the airline industry, which is taking a hit from the coronavirus. And ultimately, if you're a driver, it may ease your pain at the pump. For News with Rick Sanchez, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Good stuff, Alex. Thanks so much. But, we want to go a little deeper on this. Now, I want you to hear from Boom Bust host Christy I. She's going to explain why Russia seems to be saying, not just to Saudi Arabia, but also to the U.S. fracking industry, or the shale producers, as Alex described them. What you are proposing, they would be saying, is not fair. Not fair to us. Okay, here is my conversation with Christy. Take a listen.
But Russia is pointing out that every single time OPEC Plus decides to cut production, the U.S. shale industry decides to step up production. So every single time the U.S. is encroaching basically in their market, in their territory, and Russia, again, was not happy about that. And they said that we are losing market share to America. So Russia is also upset about a whole host of other things, including the Rosneft sanctions on their oil and energy company. They're also upset about the U.S. trying to block their Nord Stream 2 pipeline over to Germany. So because of all these grievances, Russia's looking at the U.S. shale industry being like, you can't sustain prices below $50. We can. So we are just going to not cut production. We are going to produce as much as we want. Yes, it's going to sink prices. Yes, it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt the U.S. shale producers more. So you can see the rolling effects and the systemic effects already playing out in the markets. So you have every single shale producers down 50% today in the oil sector. All across the oil and energy sector, we are down 50%.
50%. That's a huge drop. Here, in the United States on something that's having a global effect. By the way, Christie adds that while the drop in the oil prices is good for consumers, right? I mean, everybody wants to pay $2 for gas, right? In the end, it's also a net loss because we're all going to be affected by any diminished economy that may result in potentially lost jobs. Now, you know who Mark Zandi is? He's like the chief economist for Moody's, and they're like one of the biggest outfits in the world. What he's saying is that we are all now but likely headed for a recession. He's now putting the number at something between 60 and 70%. That's a huge jump in what they were talking about just a couple of weeks ago. Remember when we reported on this? There's also now a possibility that we may be in negative interest rate territory at some point, maybe as soon as July. Now, will those things happen? Is there anything that's going to be able to save the day from this economic plummeting? Can it be averted? And by the way, what got us here? What really got us here? Joining us now for more on all of this, my longtime colleague Larry King is good enough to join us. Also joining us is economist Richard Wolff. My thanks to both of you, esteemed gentlemen. Larry, I think I want to start with you. You know, there's already, you probably heard it today if you were flipping around all the business channels, there's already talk of another potential bailout. And this time that we may not just bail out the banks, but they may have to bail out the travel industry because they're getting rocked. Retail, oil, and banking. What do you think would be the reaction, especially from the American people, from voters, for example, if we did something like this again?
Well, I'm interested in how all this started. It started with the coronavirus, right?
Well, the trigger was the
certainly
coronavirus,
the explosion
right?
of it.
Yeah. But go on. I'm interested in what you're saying. Go ahead.
All right. It started with the coronavirus. People lose faith in the economy. What I've never understood, maybe Mr. Wolff could explain it better, and maybe you could too, Rick. Why, if something occurs between Russia and Saudi Arabia, why do people in America sell their Procter & Gamble stocks?
It's a great
I've never
question.
figured it out.
No, and by the way, this thing that we were, as Americans, this whole shale and fracking thing was a huge boom, right, Dr. Wolff? I mean, this thing was the cat's meow. Everybody in America was talking about this is going to be an economic boom for us, and all of a sudden, when the price of oil goes down, this is not sustainable. Would you explain, to Larry's point, why that's happening right now?
Sure. The basic answer has to do with the fact that an economy is a very complicated thing in which almost everything is linked to almost everything else, so that you cannot imagine that if you make a big change at one point, it will not ramify and affect another. To answer Larry's very good question very simply, the fracking industry was an attempt to make money off of high oil prices by going into the ground in a new way and depleting other oil resources that the United States had. The fracking companies, and here comes the big part, did not use their own money. They borrowed huge amounts of money from America's biggest banks to fund the enormous expense of setting up the infrastructure to pull that oil out of the ground. The problem is when the price of oil collapses the way it did today, the fracking companies cannot generate enough income to repay the bank loans that are out and due from them. Everybody knows who's in this business that with the fracking companies going down, with the 50% drop in their share values that you reported earlier, you're looking at banks that are trembling right now and that are going to have to call in other loans to other parts of our economy to cover the losses that they're experiencing as the fracking companies tell them we can't repay. Where this plays out, who else will be hurt in this tumult? Nobody knows, but the market is scared to death that it will be a general decline and that what the Trump government will do will be too little and too late.
Where does it all lead to? How does it affect the election? What's the cumulative effect of all of this?
You know, I think in the end, and I don't know, Dr. Wolf, if you'll agree with me on this, but it almost seems to me that this would favor, from a political standpoint, somebody like Bernie Sanders. Because if the impetus now is to create another stimulus package and to save the banks so that, as you just eloquently said, Dr. Wolf, they can pump money back into these companies that owe them the money so that they can continue to frack, then the average, I think, American is going to look at that and say, wait a minute, once again, you're asking me to take my tax money to help the big banks? Who's going to do something for me, right? Isn't that what Sanders' argument always was?
Absolutely, and he'd be right. I mean, there really is no way around this. Whatever you think of Sanders as a candidate, this is, as you yourself said, Rick, and quite rightly, this is not just a problem of a coronavirus or of an oil price change. This is a reality in which the basic patient here, the American economy, is so vulnerable. Look, here's the parallel. They're telling us that the coronavirus really won't hurt you terribly unless your immune system is compromised, unless you're elderly, etc. In other words, you're okay unless you have a systemic problem in your body. That's exactly what we have here. We would be okay with another virus, but our economy is so hyped up on credit ever since 2008 that we are now in a position of enormous vulnerability where anything can prove to be the straw that breaks this business back.
Does this help Sanders tomorrow?
It's a question of whether he can get his message out. I think Mr. Sanders' biggest problem is not the message he has, which is very popular and very resonant with the American people, but it's the media, the mainstream media, who want to deal with this now as a settled matter, as everybody coalescing behind Biden, and so they don't give him, not that they did it that much before either, but especially now, they don't give him the chance to present the arguments. If they did, I think that Michigan would be up for grabs.
Yeah, and it all becomes a question of how long this is going to last and what exactly will be the fiscal response from our government, from the central bank, from the Fed. Because if it seems to the American taxpayer like it's a little overreaching on their part, then I think it's going to start having that kind of political effect. But look, it's a great conversation. I'm glad we have it. Larry King, always a pleasure. Dr. Richard Wolf, my thanks to you as well. Good stuff, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
There are reports tonight that in Saudi Arabia, to borrow a quasi-political and biological term, the royals are eating their own. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is apparently on a warpath against those who are critical of his style of governance. He is arresting his own family, including his uncle, Prince Ahmed, his cousin, Prince Mohammed, who was the country's counterterrorism czar. We also have analysis on this story, but we're going to begin first with a report from RT correspondent John Huddy.
Saudi Arabia arrested 3 members of the royal family over the weekend for allegedly planning a coup to oust King Salman and his son Mohammed bin Salman from power. They include Prince Ahmed bin Abdulaziz, King Salman's younger brother, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, the king's nephew, and Nayef's half-brother Nawaf. All are reportedly accused of treason. King Salman is said to have approved the purge, and the move is seen as Mohammed bin Salman's push to consolidate his power, after coming under fire for his handling of various matters within the royal family and Saudi Arabia, including the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, which has been linked to bin Salman. There have also been reports that other Saudi officials, including senior army officers and Interior Ministry officials, were also arrested during the sweep over the weekend. Prince Ahmed is one of the most senior members of the ruling Al Saud family. He served as both Deputy Interior Minister of Saudi Arabia and Interior Minister and was educated in the United States. Both he and his son Nayef at one time were seen as possible heirs to the throne in what has become an increasingly bitter fight for control within the Saudi royal family. King Salman removed his brother from power in 2017 to clear the way for his own son Mohammed to take the throne. The 84-year-old monarch met with the British Foreign Secretary last week in Riyadh and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo last month at the Royal Palace. So far, there's been no comment from Saudi Arabia about the arrests. Mohammed bin Salman has denied having anything to do with Jamal Khashoggi's murder, and several people, a number of people actually, in Saudi Arabia have already been arrested in connection with it. That said, back to the royal family purge, it's unclear where those 3 senior royal family members are being held. In the past, Saudi officials who have been accused of crimes have been held at the luxurious Ritz-Carlton Hotel, though it's unclear if that is the current jail in this latest arrest and roundup and subsequent arrests. We'll keep you posted. For the news with Rick Sanchez, I'm John Huddy.
What an amazing story. Joining us now, former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. The idea that there could soon be mass arrests and that the people who are being arrested are members of the royal family. Oh, and by the way, they are real family. I mean, they're blood relatives of the guy who's arresting them.
Of course.
What gives?
He's consolidating power. No one, it's an interesting time because no one's focusing on that. Of course, there's the Russian Saudi oil issue that you raised a little earlier, but his consolidation of power might suggest that the king is not doing all that well. He may actually try to get the king to announce his ascendancy.
So people understand this. So the king, Fahd, is it?
King Fahd.
King Fahd. It's his brother that Mohammed.
One of his brothers.
And he loves the guy. I mean, it's one of his closest brothers. This is Prince Ahmed.
Right.
And the other guy was the head of the czar of the
Interior Ministry.
Of Interior Ministry. Right. So these are not like 2 goofballs.
Well, when the king replaced Nawaz with Prince Salman, there was tremendous consternation because Nawaz was actually the heir apparent to be king, the next king, and he was replaced as crown prince. Now he's just down to a lowly prince level, but now Crown Prince bin Salman is now the heir apparent thanks to his father, and therein lies the problem because you have holdovers from the Interior Ministry, what have you, who were very, very loyal to Nawaz when he was the minister, and that's why, as Huddy says, they've replaced a number of the Interior Ministry people.
One-word answer from you.
Sure.
Is bin Salman trying to get away with something here?
Yes.
I thought you might say that, as usual. Mr. Maloof, thank you for being with
Pleasure.
us. Tonight, there continues to be more questions than answers in what is being described as the end of the U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan. The picture is not very clear. For starters, it's not known who is going to be in charge of the government. It's also not known if the fighting is really over. Here's RT correspondent Michelle Greenstein with more confusion.
On Monday, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani takes his oath for a second term, but the inauguration speech is interrupted by the sound of rocket fire, explosions near the presidential palace. 2 rockets reportedly hit the end of the compound. Attendees start to panic and flee the scene, but Ghani urges them to stay.
We have seen bigger attacks. Don't be scared of 2 explosions. Don't panic. Sit down.
Afghan security forces are deployed to the site. They find a rocket launcher mounted inside what's now a burnt vehicle.
We saw the vehicle burning, then we tried to get closer to see what was happening. Suddenly an explosion happened, and then we heard 5 other explosions.
Meanwhile, next door to the presidential palace, another swearing-in ceremony is taking place. While Afghanistan's election commission declared Ghani the winner, chief executive and political rival Abdullah says the results are full of irregularities, and he too declares himself president.
During our election campaigns, we had promised people that we would not accept any government resulted by fraud, and we stand by our promise.
The split in Afghan leadership comes as the International Criminal Court, for the first time in history, moves forward with an investigation of U.S. officials for war crimes in Afghanistan during Washington's 18-year presence there. Recently, there's been talk of ending that presence, since the peace accord signed by the U.S. and the Taliban in February stipulates that the U.S. remove all forces from Afghan soil. But this lack of a united front, with 2 men declaring themselves president and the Taliban refusing to recognize either of them, may create a dilemma for the U.S. as it figures out how to move forward with the peace deal. For the News with Rick Sanchez, Michelle Greenstein, RT.
There's one more fascinating story I want to share with you tonight before we go. Fear over the spread of the coronavirus has taken a toll on the airline industry, forcing some airlines to fly ghost flights. Ghost flights in order to keep from losing out to their competitors. What does that even mean, right? Here is RT correspondent Rachel Blevins.
Global demand for travel has dropped drastically amid increasing fears over the spread of COVID-19. But some regulations are still forcing planes to take to the skies anyways, even if they don't have passengers. While many airlines are offering breaks to passengers who cancel trips, those airlines are not catching nearly as much of a break themselves when it comes to business with Europe. As reports are noting, under Europe's current rules, airlines operating out of the continent must continue to run 80% of their allocated slots or risk losing them to a competitor. Because of that use it or lose it rule, airlines are continuing to use thousands of gallons of fuel they don't need, sparking concerns for the environment. The UK's Transport Secretary called out Airport Coordination Limited in a letter in which he called on the regulator to suspend the requirement amid the coronavirus outbreak. He wrote, quote, "I am particularly concerned that in order to satisfy the 80-20 rule, airlines may be forced to fly aircrafts at very low load factors or even empty in order to retain their slots." The requirement has already been suspended for flights to and from Hong Kong and mainland China, but the impact of the coronavirus is being felt around the world, and airlines stand to face billion-dollar losses. The International Air Transport Association is warning that airlines could lose anywhere from $63 billion to $113 billion in revenue in 2020. This could amount to airlines losing up to 19% of their business if COVID-19 is not contained. This projection has increased sharply, as it is up from just $30 billion 2 weeks ago. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., Boeing took another hard hit as its stock dropped 12% on Monday. The loss comes after regulators with the Federal Aviation Administration ruled that Boeing should not be allowed to leave wiring bundles in place on the 737 MAX models. It remains unclear how Boeing will proceed and if the FAA will approve its plans to put the 737 MAX back in the air in the coming months. For now, concerns over the rampant spread of the coronavirus continue to have a massive impact on the travel industry, and it does not appear that an end is in sight anytime soon. Reporting from Reagan National Airport in Washington, Rachel Blevins, RT.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Wow, busy newscast today. Lots going on. I hope we've been able to give you some context and some perspectives on some of these stories as you follow them throughout the course of your work week. So we'll be here waiting for you. If you've got some friends looking for a newscast that's a little different, tell them we're here and tell them we do that. And by the way, make sure you let them know that we're also here on portable TV, and there they can take us with them wherever they go. We're portable. We'll see you soon. When it's time for new news again.